In this video, I give you my comparison of the Pioneer DJ DJM-S9 and the Rane 72. Find out what I think of these two flagship Serato DJ ready scratch mixers coming up. Thank you for watching PDot TV, where you'll find tips, tricks, and tutorials for DJs and music performers. Now let's get into the video. So first, let's go over the Pioneer DJ DJM-S9, since this was the first one to release between these two. Now first, let's go over the overall build quality of this mixer. Now if you've ever used a Pioneer DJ DJM mixer before, you're going to be pretty familiar with the overall feel of this mixer, from the materials it uses to just the feel of the knobs and the faders and the buttons. This thing just screams Pioneer DJ. So if you've used any other more modern mixers, anywhere from the DJM-900 Nexus on, you'll have a pretty good understanding and idea of the way this thing is built. And I've been using the DJM-900 Nexus pretty much as the mixer that I use on most gigs for the last few years now. I mean, it's almost been, half a decade. And those mixers have been shown that they're built to last, and I don't see this one being any exception. Now, the one issue that I have with this mixer, as far as build quality goes, that's kind of puzzling because the other mixers that I mentioned don't share that, is the actual paint used on the faceplate of this. And now it really boggles my mind why they didn't use the same paint that you find on the Pioneer DJM-900 Nexus, because that one, although it does wear out after a while, still lasted pretty well. But these S9s, you can see right here on this crossfader section that the paint wears pretty quickly. Now I know it's pretty standard, especially for scratch DJs and the kind of DJs that are probably going to be using this mixer that like to cut a lot. This is going to wear off eventually, but this level of wear after just a little bit of use is really puzzling. And it's not just this S9. You see a lot of S9s that have that same issue, where the paint for this faceplate and anywhere that's being used a lot does chip off pretty quickly and does scratch off. Now, shout out to my guy Jared Jackson that actually got a DJ skin from, I think, 12-inch skins. That's the exact same layout, has the exact same branding in black to cover this, so he doesn't run into an issue because he's just cutting over the sticker, which is very smart. So if you do intend on getting an S9, to avoid this, I would suggest doing the same, getting a skin and throwing this on top of it. It doesn't look any different, it still has all the same markings, and you don't have to have that 12-inch skins marking on it too, so no extra branding whatsoever. And you'll save yourself from this whole chipping paint situation, which is awesome. Now besides that, the build quality, like I mentioned, is pretty top-notch. One thing with all Pioneer products that I'm kind of not used to, because I came from Techniques and Vestax, that their products are pretty light considering how professional they are. Like CDJs and all of their mixers feel pretty light, and this S9 is no different. This is actually a pretty light mixer for being a two-channel style battle mixer, and it is considerably lighter than the 72 that we'll take a look at in a second. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that the build quality of this thing is still top-notch, but still maintains a lighter weight. So if you're going to be traveling with your mixer and you want to shed some weight between, and you're making a decision between these two, this one is definitely a lot less weight and still has the same high quality build quality. Now as far as the inputs and outputs for the S9, you have two channels, each having a phono and then a CD line input. So you can hook up one turntable or one CDJ or media player per channel. Then you have a mic input right here that you can have XLR or 1/4-inch connected, as well as an aux input, so you can hook up maybe an iPod or something like that that's connected using RCA connections right here. Then you have actual two USB connections, so you can have two computers hooked up to this mixer at once and then switch between those two, which is really nice. So those are your inputs. Now your outputs are pretty standard, but they cover all the bases. So you have your XLR outputs right here, and then you have your actual RCA outputs right here, and then you have your 1/4-inch booth outputs right here. So you have all three on three separate outputs, so you have connectivity to pretty much all the kinds of speakers that you would need all on this mixer, as well as the ability to hook up up to 4 different devices for inputs as well. Now next, I'm gonna talk about the layout and especially the effects and how these are used on this mixer. So you have your classic 3-band EQ layout, and this actually shares something that's similar to the older Rane 62, where the gain, or the trim I should say, and the filter are offset on a separate row, as well as your input selector. So that's mirrored on both channels. You have your master and other output controls here, right here in the middle, which is nice. So they're really easy to grab and really easy to change. On either side of the two EQ sections, we have the controls to load and search through your decks, as well as your looping control. So you have one button for a 4-bar loop, as well as a halving and doubling button. So this is something similar that you'd find on a lot of the other Pioneer DJ, Serato DJ controllers. So some people like this button layout where you can get a 4-bar loop right away and then half it and double it using these buttons. Some people like a rotary encoder better, where you can select the exact length of the loop you want to hit. I mean, it's all personal preference, and it's just the way that Pioneer set this one up. So right after that, below that, we have the effects section right here, where you have your beat effects that are selectable with these push buttons, which is a big difference between this mixer and the 72, where these are very accessible, really tactile, really nice buttons to hit, and you know which button you're hitting and what effect you're engaging, be it the beat effects on this side or the onboard, or I should say software Serato effects on this side. And then those are engaged using these toggle switches or paddles. These are made out of plastic, and even though they're made out of plastic, they're made out of a really good plastic, because all the S9s that I've used, I've seen these banged around pretty hard, and none of them, I have yet to see a broken S9 paddle. So big props to Pioneer on picking the materials for this. Definitely lasting, especially, a part of the mixer that's being abused, such as this. In the middle, you have your depth knob or wet dry, as well as a little screen right here that tells you what effects engage as far as your beat effects, as well as what beat is selected. So anywhere from 1/32 of a beat all the way up to, depending on what effect you have. For the echo, you have a 4-beat echo that you can engage. And then, like I mentioned on the side, another 6 buttons for the Serato effects. Now, one thing to mention is that the effects for the Serato DJ software effects, you can only use the multi-effect mode, where you have 3 effects on one side and 3 effects on the other. The single effect mode cannot be engaged on the mixer using these buttons. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Also too, one huge thing is that these software effects are actually post fader. So meaning if you engage, a echo or a reverb and you drop the fader, the effect will continue on. So that's really cool. Something that I know a lot of people are happy about, that not only are the onboard hardware effects post fader, but the software effects are post fader as well. Now moving down from that, we have the performance pad section, which was a really big selling point, especially for this mixer, because we really didn't see a mixer with performance pads laid out like this that are really easy to use, really nice and big and soft, soft style, MPC style pads. We've seen them on controllers a bunch, but actually on a mixer, this was probably the first one that had this kind of layout that really made sense and really utilized all of the software features of the Serato DJ. So here we have 4 pad modes. We have hot cue, roll, slicer, and sampler, all with their secondary modes. We have cue loop, save loop, slicer loop, and sampler roll. Now, besides the first mode and the secondary mode, there is a third mode, which is MIDI mappable. So you get a third mode where you can MIDI map all of these controls and all these pads to make them do different things. Like I've seen people that, have the cue points and then have your sampler on the bottom, etc. So you can engage multiple things at once without having to switch modes, which really comes in handy for performance purposes. Now, one thing and one big difference between this mixer and how the 72 handles their pad mode is the fact that this only has one pad mode selection right here in the middle, and it affects both sides. So you have to keep that in mind with this one. Once you select the pad mode is active for both sides. It's not possible to have one pad mode here and then another pad mode here. The only way to do that is to, MIDI map it and get that, special personalized mapping like I mentioned earlier. And then finally, here towards the bottom third of this mixer, we have the fader section. So you have, your up faders as well as your cross fader. Another huge, achievement with this mixer has to be this Magvo Pro fader. This was something that a lot of DJs were really anxious to get their hands on, because not only were you able to adjust the curve of the crossfader like you could on many other mixers, but you got even more control. So with this crossfader, on the actual front panel of this, you can adjust the tension of the actual crossfader, so how easy or how light this feels, as well as adjust the cut-in time on this crossfader using the software tool when you open Serato DJ. So that's an extreme level of customization and control you have over this crossfader to make it personalized for you and how you as a DJ want to utilize it. So big props to Pioneer for making this crossfader so customizable and just a really high quality crossfader. I really haven't had any issues with this, and I haven't run into S9s with crossfader issues. They seem to last pretty long thus far. I mean, we haven't had them around as much as we've had the Rane faders in the past with the 62 and those kind of faders, but so far so good on these Magvel Pros. Big props. Also, these up faders have contour control as well, so you can actually control the contour on this. On all three of these are on knobs as well. They're not dip switches like you'd find on the 900 Nexus. It's more along the lines of a battle style mixer that you can really fine tune the control of not only your up faders but your crossfader as well. And not only do they have contour control, all three have reverse switches, so you can reverse or hamster style all three of these faders. And another main difference between these two mixers has to be the headphone cue section. Now, the S9 has what I've called in plenty of videos a very awkward and very unintuitive headphone cue setup, where you have your actual headphone volume level, then you have your mix between your cue and your master, and then instead of push buttons like they have on all of their other mixers, like all the DJM 800, 900, 700, so on, that have push buttons to select which channels you're listening to, this is actually on a fader, much like you would have found on a Rane 57 or a Rane 56, which makes sense for scratch DJs if you have the ability to switch from cue to master as a push button like the Ranes did. But because this one has the hybrid of having the headphone mix being on a knob as well as this being on a fader, to quickly switch between cue to switching to master is really an extra chore, where you have to turn the knob, you have to move this over to get it dialed in just right, when either having this on a push button or having this selection on a push button just makes way more sense if that's the kind of DJ you are and that's the way you have your headphone cue set up. And that's how I personally DJ and how I use my headphones. So getting this right and getting used to this has always been frustrating whenever I have to mix on this mixer, and still continues to be frustrating. I mean, I've gotten used to it and I can get around, but it takes a little while, and still one of the reasons why I didn't end up picking up this mixer. Now on to the Rane 72. So again, we'll start off with build quality. This thing is built like a tank. If you've ever, held or played on any Rane mixer of like at least the last decade or so, you have an idea of how this build quality is. It's really tough, really heavy duty. Just the materials that Rane uses just feel so great, and they feel like they're gonna last a long time. Now, that's one thing that I mentioned before that people were really skeptical about, because Rane, switched ownerships. Now they're part of the In Music group. People were worried about the actual build quality of this thing, but it really feels like it's built the same. It really feels like they use very similar materials. And one thing I also like on both mixers, and one thing that I really enjoy, is that all the pots, all the stems underneath each of these are actually metal. So that's just another, thing you don't have to worry about. You know that the materials from just not even just the outside, but other, parts that they know that you're going to use for a long time are all metal, made to last. And I have no doubt that this mixer is going to be my main mixer of choice and still going to be fully functional in the years to come. Now, as far as inputs and outputs for this mixer, they're very similar to the S9, where we have two inputs per channel. So we have an aux input, which is the CD line input. And then on the other side, we have a phono line switchable input. So you can actually have two CD decks connected on one channel at the same time, which is not possible on the S9. Also, we have the mic input on this mixer. We actually have two of them, which is unlike the S9, which has one mic and one aux. We have two mic inputs that are line and mic switchable, as well as another actual aux input right here as well. And then for the outputs, we have XLR outputs, 1/4-inch outputs, and then also a session output, which is another RCA output. Another cool thing about the output section of this mixer is that all of the outputs, all three of these, have separate volume controls, where on the S9, only the booth and the master have volume controls. The RCA outputs for that mixer are actually connected to the master volume controls, so you have a little bit more control on the 72 as far as outputs are concerned. Now, just like the S9, you have two USB inputs, so you can have two computers hooked up. But another addition that this mixer has is you have an actual USB hub, so you can have two USB devices connected to this as well. Now, this was really a selling point for the Rane 12, their turntable controller, but you can use these for anything else as well. So another hard drive, maybe another secondary controller, can all be plugged into this and be used with this mixer. Now we'll go over the layout of this mixer. It's kind of similar to the S9, but in some ways it's actually more similar to the other Pioneer mixers like the DJM-900. So on this mixer, all of your EQ controls as well as your filter and your level or trim knob is all going to be in one row, just like on the Pioneer DJM-900 Nexus. So if you're used to working on that mixer, having everything in one line, you'll feel right at home, getting on this one and knowing where everything is. It's not like the S9, which is like the 62, which is kind of where the two brands flip-flop, where some of the controls are on one line and other controls are on another. This is all in one line, so you can kind of mix with this a little bit more blindly than you could on the other one if you're used to the DJM layout. Now, a big honking difference of this mixer is the screen and what you can do with the screen. If you want a more in-depth description of what the screen does and all its controls and how you can control the software as well as things on the mixer using this, go ahead and check out my other video. I'll go ahead and link that up right here on the card. Go ahead and click on that if you haven't seen that already to get more in-depth on this mixer. But just continuing along, it's pretty dope, really responsive, touchscreen, easy to use. I like that a lot. It's really gotten me away from looking at my computer as much because I can do everything from scrolling and loading songs and looking at the waveforms all in here without having to switch my eyes to the computer, which is awesome. Now going down to the effects section, we have, just like on the S9, the effect on-off on paddles. These ones are actually made out of metal and they feel really great as well. Now, because this mixer just came out, we don't know how sturdy these are, but these feel really solid. Now, we know the S9 paddles can definitely stand up to some abuse, and these overall feel even heavier and even more well-built than those ones. So if that's any sign, I think these ones will last just as long, if not longer, than the ones on the S9. Now, one difference with these paddles is that you can actually change the orientation of these. Unlike on the S9 where they're stuck in one position and that's it, these ones, you have the latch that's all the way up, or the momentary, which is just flicking down. You can actually take this out and flip it all the way around and make the latch actually be downward and the momentary upward. So that's another option, and that's another customization that this mixer has that the S9 doesn't have. So if you've always wanted the momentary or the latch, instead of facing up, facing down, that's possible on this mixer. Now moving to the pad section, this has a very similar pad layout. As you can see, 8 pads per side, 2 rows, very, very similar. But the main difference here is that the pad modes on this mixer are per deck. So unlike on the S9 where you have the pad mode selection in the middle and it affects both sides, you can have different pad modes on each deck. So for instance, I can have cues on this side, I can have loops on this side. It's very easy to switch between modes and have them independent of each other. One thing that I think is really cool that I could see this being really useful is that you could have cue points on this side while still having your sampler on this side, so you can cue point juggle on this while maybe drumming out or playing something with your different samples that you have in your sampler on this side, all because you have the ability to have separate pad modes per side without having to do some extra MIDI mapping. And also too, that leads me to the next thing, where because this has more pad modes than the actual S9, which only has 4, this has 5, you can actually MIDI map and have a different MIDI map per different pad mode. So you can have 5 pad modes for this mixer instead of the 4 that you have on the S9 as well. So not only do you have independent pad modes, not only do you have more pad modes, but you can have more saved MIDI mappings for this mixer as well. Now, the headphone cue section of this mixer is very similar to the headphone cue section that was found on the predecessor to this, the Rane 62, where you have the cue buttons right here to select which channel is on the cue. Then you have your cue mix knob to mix between the cue or the master, as well as the headphone volume right here. Also, a really cool feature that I loved about the 62 that's included on this is that, say you're cueing channel 1 and you're switching over songs and you need a cue channel 2, just hitting channel 2 automatically turns off channel 1, which is awesome in my opinion, because that saves you from having to double tap or using 2 fingers to tap. it just really switch and really intuitive that, you know, if you're queuing one channel, you can need to switch over and cue the other channel. It'll automatically turn that off. And don't worry, if you need to cue both, it's very possible you can latch both of them on if you want to, you know, use it in that way as well. So very flexible, very easy to use, very intuitive, and a lot like the other mixers that are the industry standards with the 62 as well as the DJM-900 Nexus. So if you're used to those setups and you're used to how to set up your headphone cue on those mixers, this one is going to be really easy to get to know and really easy to use right away. Now finally, down to the fader section of this mixer. This mixer uses Rane's newest fader called the Mag 3 fader that has a lot of customizations and a lot of things that you can change on it that's very similar to the Pioneer S9, and I really think this has a lot to do because they knew that this was going to be the main competition for the S9. So just like on the S9 with this, you have the ability to adjust the tension on this crossfader, but big difference here is that that tension adjustment is not available on this mixer on the fly. You actually have to go ahead and unscrew this faceplate, take this off, do the adjustment, then put this back on. Now that was a really bad move on Rane's part in my opinion, because unlike with the S9 where you can go ahead and have the tension set to whatever DJ is hopping on, especially with two USB interfaces where you can switch DJs really fast and go back and forth, you can have that adjustment on the S9. Maybe, you know, you like having a little bit more tension, the DJ you're switching off with likes it really loose. That ability to switch it back and forth really quickly because the knob's on the outside of the mixer is something that's really awesome about the S9. That's just not possible with this. It's really not the same and nowhere near the kind of solution that Pioneer has with their crossfader. Now one thing I will say about this crossfader that I like more than the Pioneer S9 is the ability to change the cut-in time on this fader, and these as well. Now instead of having to do that inside the software, because on the S9 you actually have to open Serato DJ, go into the preferences and open the actual crossfader cut-in time preference. Here, all of that is handled right here on that screen. So you just go into the system settings for the mixer, pick your cut-in time, and you're good to go, which means if you want to change the cut-in time per DJ, you don't have to worry about diving into the software. You can just do that really quickly using the controls on the mixer. So that's awesome. I really think that's a way better solution than what the S9 had to offer in that department. Now, just like on the S9, all three of these faders, curve adjustments are on knobs. So, you know, pretty much the battle standard for years now, as well as all three of them have reverse or hamster switches. So that's pretty similar. I will say though, one thing about Rane's hamster switches on this mixer, as well as this 62, the fact that they're so small. On the S9, the reverse switches are pretty big and really easy to find and, you know, feel really good to the touch, where these are really small, kind of jagged and pointy. I never liked them on the 62 and I still really don't like them on this mixer. I do run into it when I'm mixing and cutting because I do mix regular but cut reverse or hamster, but that's something that I've gotten over, but I really wish they would have used bigger switches on this thing. So that's my comparison of the Pioneer DJM-S9 and the Rane 72. So for some final thoughts. Now, as far as performance mixers go, you really can't go wrong with either one of these two. I mean, they both have really similar layouts, a lot of the same functionality, and overall build quality is pretty top notch. I mean, you get what you pay for here. They're both flagship mixers and they feel like it. Now, as far as mixing concerns, that's the one big difference for me, especially when it comes to the headphone section of these two mixers. Now, I've mentioned that the Headphone Cue section on the S9 is probably my least favorite from any mixer that I've ever played on. And the actual cue system on the Rane 72 is pretty much industry standard and borrows a lot from Pioneer's other DJM mixers such as the 900 Nexus. Maybe that's just the way I use my headphones and I cue up. Maybe that's just my familiarity with using this kind of cueing system, but my preference for mixing has to be the Rane 72, where I feel way more comfortable with the way I control the usage of my headphones, which allows me to feel more comfortable and more fluid in my mix and lets me go back and forth quickly, and I can hear what I want to hear when I need to hear it. Now, as far as performance and routines are concerned, yeah, they share a lot of the same layout and the same features, but I gotta give the advantage to the Pioneer DJM-S9, and that's thanks to a few things. First of all, the ability to change your effects really quickly between the 6 beat effects that you can select at once and the 6 Serato DJ effects that you can select at once being on the mixer as tactile buttons makes it real easy to switch, and you can feel really confident knowing you're selecting the right mix by tapping these buttons and the response they give you. Whereas with the 72, you actually have to tap on the screen and scroll through the different effects. It's doable, but not as quick and not as tactile as you can do it on the S9. And another effect related one is the fact that the Serato DJ software effects are actually post fader on the S9. Now it really confuses me because on previous Rane products such as the 62, the 61 even, and all their other mixers, the 57 Mark II even, the actual software effects found in Serato DJ were post fader, where in this one the only post fader effects you get are the actual flex effects. Yes, you can utilize two of them at the same time, but it doesn't have the flexibility that the S9 gives you with all of the effects being post fader. And finally, the last difference that I find between these two as far as performance and routines go is the ability to change the mode on the filter of the S9. It's a lot like being able to change the mode on the color effects on the 900 Nexus. You have that ability to change the mode in the software. Yeah, it's not tactile and you can't select it like you can with the other effects on here, but at least you get that possibility to get things like dub echo, which I use a lot on the 900 Nexus and I wish was actually on here as, you know, a filter mode. The ability to have more than just a filter on the S9 instead of just this, you know, two-pole low pass high pass filter on the 72 is something that I really miss about the Pioneer mixers. So finally, which mixer do I think is better? Now for me and my style of DJing, for mixing and performance, I'm gonna have to go ahead and go with the Rane 72. That's mainly because of the whole cue situation that I discussed earlier. With the S9, I don't mind it, but it takes me a little while to get used to it. Even after using this thing gig after gig, it still takes me that little bit of time to get adjusted to, you know, making the headphone cue section work for me. In comparison to this one where I can just put on the headphones right away and I'm very comfortable and very familiar with how to set my headphone cue up. Now, as far as performance goes, you know, it's really similar for me, like how these are laid out and the functionality of it, like I discussed earlier. And maybe I haven't dove deep enough on either of these mixers as far as routines and performances have gone. I know both of these are very powerful, but even in that department, I'm gonna give the edge out to this one because if I needed to go in and, you know, make my own MIDI mappings as far as for the pad sections, which is what you see a lot of the top tier DJs do with the S9, they don't actually use these modes. They mainly make their own MIDI mappings for the pads. You see people like A-Track, Miles Medina, and SK83 using that feature with the S9 to get the most out of it. You have even more of the ability to do that with this mixer as well. But that's not to say that the S9 isn't the choice for a lot of people out there. There are a lot of Pioneer fans out there, and for good reason. They make great products, and maybe you want a mixer that's lighter, easier to travel with. Maybe you want something that you're familiar with the sound as far as the EQs and the filters and stuff like that. So maybe the S9 might be the choice for you. But for me, I'm gonna have to go 72. Thank you for watching my comparison of the Pioneer S9 and the Rane 72. If you found this video useful, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, go ahead and click right here to subscribe to this channel. Or if you'd like to watch more content, go ahead and click on that video right there. And thank you for watching PDot TV, where you'll find tips, tricks, and tutorials for DJs and music performers. See you next time.